Welcome back. The overuse of opioids is a growing deadly issue affecting families all over our country. Blair Miller recently sat down with Vice President of Legislative Affairs for the Colorado Hospital Association to discuss efforts being made in our state to cut back on the number of times these drugs are administered and prescribed.
So in basic terms, what are we talking about the problem here in 2019?
Sure. So we have seen opioid overdoses double since the beginning of this century. Opioid deaths have tripled in that time frame. We see a lot of folks who originally get addicted just following surgeries or following accidents where they get prescribed an initial dose of an opioid painkiller. But they're very addictive, and so then we see them turning to heroin and other illegal drugs to continue to take care of their addiction once their prescriptions run out. And it's reached kind of a crisis point in our state.
And so you guys recently hosted an opioid safety summit. When we've seen this problem going on for several years now. So at the summit, what was the discussion topic at that point?
Yeah, so we had 450 people from across the state, providers, policymakers from the local, state, and even national levels, coming together to say that enough is enough. We can work together and we can actually do something to reduce the number of deaths and really tackle the epidemic here in Colorado. At the summit, we had fantastic conversations about best practices for clinicians. We heard some really uplifting stories from those living or survivors of addiction, and then we heard some really fascinating information about a pilot project that the Hospital Association kicked off in 2017, looking at reducing the number of opioids that are prescribed initially in hospital emergency departments.
And so, as we coming out of that now, what are we looking at like for the rest of the year, heading into next year? Is there like what's changing, what's new this year that we can really that you guys are focusing on to try and cut back on those numbers that are being prescribed? Yeah,
so our initial pilot was in 10 emergency departments across the state of Colorado, and we had a goal of reducing the number of opioids administered by 15%. And in lieu of those opioids, using something called altos, or alternatives to opioids. And that could be a lidocaine patch or a variety of different treatment options in lieu of prescription drugs. And again, the goal was a reduction of 15%, but we actually saw the reduction of 36% initially. And what we heard at our summit was the number has continued to decrease, and now it's up to 62%.
And we've seen some of our state lawmakers, some of our, kind of heads of state, attorney general, get involved. What part do the lawmakers need to play in this whole process?
Yeah, so we usually talk about it in the form of two buckets. There's that upfront bucket, and changing the way we approach clinical practice and changing the prescription patterns. And so that's where our pilot project was focused. We saw legislation last year looking at the initial prescription amounts, limiting to 7-day prescription supplies. But then on the back end, we have hundreds of thousands of people struggling with addiction in Colorado, and so really focusing in on that treatment aspect. And so one of the big wins from the Hospital Association perspective last year was the passage of House Bill 1136, which created an inpatient substance use benefit for our state Medicaid program, and it's estimated to help about 142,000 people in Colorado.
And so, if say I'm at home, I'm watching. Maybe I have an appointment coming up. I think maybe I'll get some opioid prescriptions. I'm already prescribed opioids, and I'm kind of wary of that. What should I look out for when I'm going to my doctor, and just personal awareness in general?
Yeah. Well, let me be clear. There are absolutely times when opioids are the appropriate clinical decision, but it's really a conversation between you and your provider. It's okay to have that conversation and say, I don't know if I feel comfortable with that. Are there alternatives? And I think what we're focusing on is helping to train our providers around the state to say there are alternative treatment options that can be available to you. We don't always have to immediately go to these prescriptions. And so we have a new program that we're rolling out called Colorado Cures. And that is taking the lessons learned from our pilot project, which reduced opioid administration in emergency departments, and we're taking it out to the other medical specialties. And we're going to be developing clinical practice guidelines for each of those medical specialties, whether it's anesthesiologists or primary care, looking at that and working together with our clinicians to say we can provide different treatment options that have the same impacts to our client.
Now listen, if you ever have a question or a segment idea for us, you can tweet us anytime at Denver 7 Politics. And you can always watch today's segments anytime at thedenverchannel.com/Politics Unplugged. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will be back next Sunday for another edition of Politics Unplugged.